Hey everybody, this is Josh here for another episode of the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast. I am very happy to be joined by Osaro Ezomo. Osaro, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
Very excited to dive into some discussion. Just before we jump into that, most people know me, right? I'm Josh, I'm the host, Canadian immigration lawyer, CEO here at Visto.ai. Can you give us a quick introduction about yourself, your background, and what you're working on these days?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Osaro Ezomo, and I'm the founder at the Grad Life Canada Immigration Consultant. I am only maybe about 2 years into my practice, or a little shy of 2 years. But I've been in the immigration field for like as long as I can remember, since the past 10 years. I came in as an international student. I went through the whole, temporary to permanent residency process and, the whole 1 yard. And prior to becoming an immigration consultant, I worked for non-profit, provincial government, and tech industry. So that's sort of my expertise. And right now, I'm really focusing on, growing my business, growing my practice, and also helping folks navigate our ever complex immigration world.
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of summed it up well at the end, right? It's certainly over the last couple of years become maybe as complex as we've ever seen it, especially with what we're seeing a lot of in the news right now, right? I'll just timestamp this recording is January 18th, 2024. And Osara, there's a lot of news and talks right now about
Hmm.
international students, right? Immigration numbers in general, the difficulty that they're having staying, settling, evolving or advancing, quote unquote, to permanent residence. What are you seeing right now? If we can just kind of kick that off in a general sense before we maybe dive deeper, what are you seeing right now? And maybe what are you thinking right now as well?
I feel there's a lot of noise. I feel everyone is talking about either the same thing or saying different things with different words. But I feel like there's just a lot of noise, way too much noise. Folks that are currently in Canada, like constantly in panic mode. Those that are outside Canada thinking about immigrating to Canada, it's just like there's just so much. Like you have the
Hmm.
influencers doing videos, you have, the minister with several announcements almost every other day. Maybe I'm exaggerating there, but there's just a lot of noise. And I think that is causing a lot of distraction. I feel like we really need to get back to the actual business of immigration and just going, this is what our priority is moving forward and actually doing that and focusing on that alone.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think that's kind of like almost a great summary of maybe what's quote unquote wrong. And I'd love to talk about maybe what you'd like to see more of, right? So I agree. It seems to be especially when like a new minister comes in, right? There's like a lot of, hey, we got to give some speeches, we got to tell people what they want to hear. What I would love to start seeing ASAP is them to start doing stuff, right? And we can maybe get into what kind of stuff that we hope that they do. At the very least, it sounds like Minister Miller is serious about getting down to business, as you kind of alluded
Okay.
to, right? It seems like IRCC, or at least he, is kind of at his wits' end with what the heck has been going on over the last few years. What do you think based on what they're actually saying? And then I'd also love to hear, like, what do you think are a few things that you would love to see IRCC start doing?
I feel like over the last little while, there's just been a lot of, would I say contradiction in some sense? Like we had Minister Fraser, and while he was here, it was really a big push to let's drive the immigration numbers. Let's open new programs. Let's compete with, the US or the UK. Let's try and attract talent, right? And then there's a shift in portfolio, and then we have Minister Miller, and it's a completely different rhetoric, right? And
Mhm.
so there's just that lack of consistency occurs from one minister to another. And I guess I totally understand that times are changing, and I guess the public is, looking for something different in immigration. And I can understand that immigration is also a very fluid topic in general. So I can see why priorities will shift every now and then. At the same
Mhm.
time, it would be nice to people literally put their lives on hold when it comes to immigration. Like I'll use my own personal story. I pretty much could not focus on anything else until I finally transition over to permanent residency. And so
Right.
when folks are in that, I feel like they are constantly on a holding pattern. And then when we don't see that transition or that consistency from one minister to another, it just makes things a little bit more complex for folks to follow through on things. And it becomes a little bit more, I feel like if I say difficult, I'm even simplifying things for lack of better terms, but it just gets a
Right.
little bit more complex, right?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the advantages that immigration professionals who have gone through the process have is that you can
Hmm.
probably relate quite well to a lot of your clients that might be going through these. I was born and raised in Canada, right? I've never had to apply for PR anywhere in my life.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I
fill an
can't
immigration
relate to that.
form.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can't relate to that. I can only imagine how it might like hang over your head, right? Almost like like just having like gray clouds hanging over your head.
Hmm.
And I want to get into that a little bit more in terms of, especially right now, we're seeing a lot of that. I think the big reason for what you were talking about, which is, the big change in rhetoric, I think is largely due to the economy right now. I mean, if you
Hmm.
go back a couple of years, the international student industry in general exploded, right? Well, it has been exploding over the last 6, 7, 8 years, right? The number of students that they're letting in. But it's been a huge industry for the country, right? Like what a lot of people don't know is that the international student industry is like one of the biggest industries, like one of the biggest revenue generating industries in our country, right? You might think banking and finance and telecom and blah blah blah, and those are obviously big, oil and gas, blah blah blah. The international student industry generates something like 22 billion a year, right, for
Hmm.
Canada. So they just kind of let that ride for years, and just like everything great, right, eventually something comes crashing down. And now what's happened in the last few years is there's a lot of fraud going on in that space. There's not enough room or a good enough fit, which we'll get into in just a second, for all those
Hmm.
students to convert to PR.
Yeah.
There's not enough houses because we can't build them fast enough because of, maybe bylaws, or there's just not enough people to build them, ironically.
Hmm.
So now it's all coming, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
amalgamated into this one big volcano that's been heating up over the last few years, and now it's,
Hmm.
finally starting to blow. So that's what I think, right? It's like a lot of these interrelated factors that have been bubbling and now they're coming up. And it's unfortunate. I don't think things are going to look too pretty in the next year or two. I think they're going to have to clamp down on the
Right.
international students. They said they're going to freeze, or they're going to hold the quota for PR. I think a
Yeah.
lot of students are going to end up going home. I think they're going to get tougher on the schools.
You know what though?
So,
I struggle with, I'm just going to interrupt, sorry to interrupt you
yeah,
there a
go
little
for it.
bit. In terms of the housing piece, right? I really would love to see the stats that it's really pointing to the fact that, temporary resident or international students are really driving up this change, right? I don't know that I haven't seen any data specifically, but I would think that maybe,
Yeah.
the advisors do have that. I'm really curious to see what that is leading to.
Well, I
Because
think I
quite
agree with
frankly,
you in the sense that
right.
I think people are wrongly blaming international students for rising housing
100%.
costs. Yeah.
Right.
And it's so easy to like put that microscope on it and say, "Oh, hey, there's now more international students and housing costs have gone up, so it must
Right.
be causal, right?
Correlated. No,
One
it's
must." Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, not only have there been a ton more international students, there's also been a ton more PRs. Population's just going up in general as well.
Hmm.
And they don't let builders build fast enough, right?
I
So
think
so
that's
I agree.
I think that's the big problem. Like, how do we support builders to build houses faster? Not just for international students or for new permanent residents, but also for locals, right? Like
Mhm.
international students just don't come from nowhere and buy a house. They don't just buy
Mhm.
houses, right? Like, where would they get the funds from? Where do they get the credit from? Like, a typical international student will probably not be able to afford a home in 10 years or 5 years,
Right.
right? So the fact that they think that they're the ones impacting the price of homes, like it just doesn't make sense to me. It's just not rational enough. I feel they
That's
are huge
probably the
talking
perfect point.
points.
Is the sense that, like, for example, I'm born and raised in Canada. Most of my
Right,
close friends are born and raised in Canada. We're
right,
in our 30s. Nobody owns a home. You can't afford to own a home, right?
right.
It's so expensive. I mean, I also live in Toronto. That doesn't help, right? But who in their, early 30s and 20s can afford to buy a home in Canada if you're
Yep.
living in Toronto, in Vancouver, maybe in Ottawa,
Mm-hmm.
Montreal, etc. It's borderline impossible. So exactly like you said, how do international students have anything to do with that, right?
I have
I
no
I don't know.
idea. But everyone is like
Um,
hitting the drum. That's where it is. I'm like, okay, all right, you guys gotta chill. But anyways, I digress.
yeah, and I think maybe that's part of the problem, Asaro, is like this is a big problem that is not it's not just an international student quote unquote problem. This is a countrywide problem that relates to housing and cost of living and
Yeah.
all these grocery stores that are gouging people, with their price increases. And that affects students because, students don't come with too much money, right? So
Mm-mm.
if you land in Canada, housing costs are high, grocery costs are high, you're kind of like setting them up for failure in a sense.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about this. I do want to get into transitioning to PR because I think that's a super interesting topic. But before we
Mm.
get off of this kind of in general, like big kind of systemic issue that we're kind of seeing here is what are two or three things you think we could do or the government could do, or if you could wave a wand, the government could do to try and start fixing the problem?
I think that the government is doing great right now in terms of just aligning immigration priorities to sort of align with the labor shortages, like noticeable labor shortages. I really want to see more evidence type driven policies and solutioning. I really would like to see folks that are actually in that space of or have actually experienced that transition or have actually gone through the whole immigration process to be part of the policy making piece. I find that sometimes there's a disconnect with what the government or RSS is sort of prioritizing and to what actually is what I would call or term a solution. I'm going to give a practical example. Back again to the international students where they go, all letters of acceptance has to be validated 100%. And they came up with a solution where you have to find somebody in the designated learning institution to either verify the process or verify the letter of acceptance. And it's a very manual process where you have Excel sheets to verify letters of acceptance. In my mind, it's 2024. Like, why are we having these types of solutions, right?
Mhm.
So I feel like we really need to catch up to the pace of the actual world, for lack of a better term. I find that with RCC's policies, this sometimes, like I said before, a disconnect. So it would be nice to see those that are actually in the immigration process have more stakeholders where in terms of decision making or policy making. I think that having folks that are in the weeds and the day to day, talking to new immigrants, talking to those who are looking to come to Canada, having their input in solutioning or policy, not necessarily policy making, but being part of that process, having an input in that process, I feel like will bring a lot of value to the immigration system in a whole.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I think the more open and two-way street
Uh-huh.
conversations that are going
Uh-huh.
on, right, can only benefit because they only know so much, right? The government employees, whether they're sitting in Ottawa or, wherever, they only know so much. And the other thing is, there's such a great community of Canadian immigration professionals, right? Lawyers and consultants. And, well, in some provinces, I guess like paralegals and notaries and stuff like that.
Right,
And like you said, we've had how many million new immigrants over the last few years, right? Who can probably talk to their experience, what was good, what was bad, et cetera, et cetera. So
right.
I think they're starting to think in the right direction. I hope they start taking some, good action to kind of clean up some of the sketchier industries, for lack of a better word. And
Yeah,
you mentioned like alignment. I think that if they could improve the international student program, the study permit, program to just be a little bit more in line with, number one, legitimate schools that are, here for the right reasons. And number two, like pushing students to programs that really fill the labor gaps in Canada, right?
right,
Like we just have too many students pushed to whatever programs will have the highest acceptance rate. And
right.
then we kind of set them up for failure because, you know what I mean? Those
Yeah,
degrees may or may not be needed. So maybe we can use that to kind of segue. What are you seeing right now? We have all these international students graduating every year. And in a lot of cases, they graduate and they get what's called like a post-grad work permit, which allows them to stay and work in Canada for a little bit, right? The duration can differ depending on the length of their program. And the goal for a lot of them is to get enough work experience so that they can eventually apply for permanent residence.
Hmm.
What are you seeing right now, Saro, in terms of from what I see in the news and what I hear? There's a lot of students struggling right now, right, to make that transition to PR. What are you seeing right now, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. You know what? I think we've always had that struggle. I'm going to take myself back to when I graduated because I came for a master's degree in 2012. And in 2014, I graduated. However, we still had some folks in my graduating class that really wanted to stay in Canada, but could not stay because they just couldn't find the jobs. They couldn't
Right,
qualify for certain programs and they had to go back. So this is
right,
not a 2024 problem. This has always been in existence. I feel like these days of social media, it has just been so like amplified and a lot of people are talking about it. They're being more open about their experiences. And I think just it's just the age that we are in where everyone like information is just more easily disseminated as opposed to how it was in the past. So I feel like this
right,
has always been a problem. It is, we've always, I still remember folks in my graduating class that had to go back home, not because they wanted to, but it just couldn't find that pathway. So it's always
right.
being there,
Well,
right?
I think you're right, but I think the other difference is the numbers are just bigger now, right? It's always been a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but in
Mm-hmm.
2014, they were accepting 130,000 students a year.
Right,
Last
right.
year, they accepted what? Almost 600,000, right? So the
Yeah.
numbers have just like the industry has grown too big too fast, in my
And
opinion,
I
right?
absolutely agree, right? And I'm talking 10 years ago. Okay.
Right.
So if we're looking 130, 10 years ago, then maybe we're looking, well, I mean, times three is a lot, but relatively,
More than I mean,
yeah.
think about it too, right? Like number 1, do we have that many jobs depending on what programs they're graduating from? Do the schools have 3, 4, 5 times as many resources to help all those students prep
Mm-hmm.
resumes, interview practice, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like has the rest of the space caught up to the volume to provide the support that the students need? The other question I wanted to ask you, Asaro, is if I may, what was the master's program? Because like I think part of it is we need to like I'm just curious to hear in
Mm-hmm.
general because it'll give us good perspective. But also like, maybe we should stop allowing these colleges to run like 1 and 2 year business admin degrees, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're graduating tens of thousands of students a year with business admin degrees, it's no
Mm-hmm.
surprise that most of them can't find jobs, right? So,
Right.
but what like should we be pushing the colleges and the students into STEM, into healthcare, into trades?
You're right. I think that, especially when I even have consultations and when I speak to my colleagues, right? It's very easy to, not necessarily easy. When you see where Canada's priorities is headed, like right now we know like these are the, occupation that, Canada is going to prioritize moving forward, right? And so when you see folks in that field, you go, hey, this makes the most sense for you, right? Then based on what the projections look like based on what Canada is really prioritizing based on your skill set. However, there are folks that really have backgrounds in, not STEM, not agriculture, not what's the other one? Help me here. Health sector, right?
Healthcare? Yeah.
Healthcare. Yeah. So if they're folks that, don't necessarily fit into that, five occupation priority that we prioritize, there are other pathways too, right? And so when you think about other provision nomination programs, the fact that these are the where Canada is, experiencing notable labor shortages doesn't necessarily translate to the fact that other areas are not struggling, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I totally get where you go. Everyone is coming to do a 1 year. Like I was going through a school, and the school was offering a 1 year program for I think it was like $25,000 for international students. I'm like, wait a minute, like it's just in my mind. I'm like, this is a lot. So if I was coming for a two
Mhm.
year diploma program, I would have to pay $50,000. Like
Mhm.
they do blow my mind, right? And I feel like if we're really looking at enforcing and saying this one needs to happen, this one needs to happen, then I think there's just going to be some sort of check and balance there. Like we need to walk our talk and not just talk and go, this is what we need to do. We want to be heavy handed, but how does that translate to, the government and how they interact with these post-secondary institutions and whatnot? But I feel
Right.
like, yeah, there's just so many touch points where things are, for lack of better terms, regulated or not necessarily regulated, controlled, or there are no checks and balances, and, you know, things happen, right?
But that's why, Osaro, I think it's such a big problem is the pricing and the expectations.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
government can't control everything. I guess like the provincial governments could kind of control pricing in a
Yeah.
sense. But
Mhm.
I think what's happening is you have young students, right, or aspiring international students, right? Maybe they're wherever. Let's just come up with an example, right? You're an 18-year-old kid and you're in India or you're in Africa or you're in China or wherever. It doesn't even matter where, right?
Mhm.
You're in a country that's not Canada and you're thinking of starting and, doing or maybe you're 22, you've got your undergrad and you're going to do like a post grad or you want
Mhm.
to start a life in Canada,
Yeah.
right? That's really one of the main reasons, right, why most people come here. Now, why are students willing to pay 25, 50K? It's not because it's the best programs in the world and the finest institutions. Canada has great institutions, right?
Yeah.
But that's not really necessarily the primary reason why a lot of students are coming here. It's because a lot of them are, like you alluded to at the beginning, they're watching the influencers on YouTube or they are getting, they're talking to unregulated study abroad agents who are
Mhm.
saying, listen, if you want to settle in Canada, just go apply to these schools because they're cheaper,
Mhm.
right? For
Mhm.
international students, like 10, 15K a year is cheaper, right? Because of how high their tuition is.
Yeah.
And go to these schools because you'll get accepted. And then you'll figure out how to get PR. Don't worry, right? You'll get your PGWP. Don't worry, you'll get PR.
Well,
And
they tell them it's guaranteed. You just need to go to school
exactly,
and yeah, you're gonna get a PR. Like,
exactly.
wait a
So,
minute.
but then what happens? Number one, the agents get their commission, right? Because as long as the student shows up and pays their tuition on that first day,
Yep.
the agent gets their commission. So now they're happy. They've already made their money, right? A year or two goes by, the student is out 50K, they graduate, hopefully, and they hopefully get their PGWP. But now they go to try and hit the job market and they can't get a job, right?
Mhm.
A few months go by, a few more months go by. You can't find a job. Or maybe you find a job, but it's not a skilled job. Or it's a job that doesn't qualify you for express entry, or it's a job that doesn't qualify you for any of the PNPs. A few
Mhm.
more months go by, 6, 12 months go by, your PGWP is about to expire.
Yeah.
What do? Do you go home and eat the fact that you just spent upwards of 50, not even considering living expenses, right? So
Right.
if you consider rent and food and blah, 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 we're talking 75, probably 100K minimum, right? Depending on the city.
Mhm.
So now, initially your goal was just, hey, I want to start a new life in Canada. Sure, maybe tuition's a little bit more expensive, but it'll lead me to a great life and I'll make the money back down the road. But
Mhm.
that's not
Mhm.
happening, right? So that's why I think we need to better align these programs with setting students up for success after, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right. And when I have conversations, I always go, hey, from my experience, I find that when folks come here and they already have skills or they have work experience from back home, I feel like they bring a lot to the table. And even when they are done with school and they're transitioning into finding a job here, I find that those with work experience are better positioned to transition faster. I'm
Mhm.
going to use the example of a 19-year-old who just graduated from high school and they come here and they go to a 2-year program, say a 2-year college diploma program. Even after they graduate from the 2-year program and get some work experience, like the question is employers are not ready to take on folks that do not have experience, right? They want
Right.
you to come in on day one and hit the ground running. Like a lot of employers don't have that time to train you, right? And so if I was employing, I'll probably go, oh, do you have the work experience? Yes. Do you have the education? I'll take folks with the work experience over those that do not have work experience. So even if you came here with a Canadian degree, but I have another, applicant who's got, say, maybe the same Canadian degree, but they have additional work experience. I'm probably gonna go, let me speak to the spoke that has work experience because I feel they know what to do already. Right. And
Mhm.
so I find that sometimes when the promise of coming to gain education and that, mentality that's automatically going to set you up for success, I don't think that's attainable now anymore. Even folks that go through the Canadian education system, those that are born here, go to university, they don't just find jobs immediately, right? But I feel like folks that come here, as international students and want to transition over, they have that additional level of, pressure and they have time running against them, right? And so there's just
Mhm.
a lot going on, right? And so I tell folks once you graduate, this remaining in Canada is your priority. Then you want to prioritize whatever job that, predispositions you to accomplishing that goal first. And once you get that goal, then obviously you can continue to grow in your career, whatever that is. However,
Mhm.
if you are not very strategic about how all this is going to pan out, 5 years down the line, you're going to be short at least 75,000 and you may find yourself going back to your country, right? And which is not,
Mhm.
the ideal for a lot of students because literally you, like you said, you place your lives on hold in your other country and then you come to Canada in the hopes that, things are gonna, you're starting a new life here. And in most cases, you don't think about going back. But the reality is that, some people do go back,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I
I
think
think we're gonna see bigger numbers than ever.
and we're definitely going to see more of that. Like, if you look at the express entry draws lately, they've been so high. I remember even when I applied for permanent residency, I applied through the Canadian experience class, and I don't think my Sarah score was as high as what we have right now.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
I had graduated, I would never would have been selected to apply under the Canadian experience class because my Sarah score was nothing close to what we have now. So it's become even more competitive, right? And so it's almost like if you don't have a pathway through provincial nomination programs or maybe other pilot programs like the CIPP, then it's almost impossible for you to really position yourself to transition.
Yeah. I remember the good old days where if you had like a 460, 465, you
Yeah.
were sitting pretty.
Yeah.
They haven't done it. I was just going over this because I did the Visto show last week and I did a deeper dive on Express Entry. I don't
Ooh,
think they've had an all program draw below 500 in like
no,
over a year. It's
no.
crazy. So, anyways, like you said, there has to be I think what we're both kind of alluding to is there needs to be better education and transparency at the beginning, right? Which
Right.
is unfortunate because many students are dealing with people who aren't really trustworthy, right? And they're just in it for the commission. So they're willing to tell the student whatever they want to hear for them to work with them, right? So
Right,
now,
right.
saying all this, what do you think the government owes anything to all these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of international students that are stuck right now on temporary status? Like, what do you think they should do about it, if anything?
That's a good question, but I don't know that the government necessarily owes you anything, right? Because from the get-go, you were told that, when you graduate, you have an option to work. And if you meet the requirements to work in Canada, then you can potentially apply for your post-graduation work permit. And once you get that, it can meet the requirements to apply for permanent residency, and then you apply. So it's all at the end of the day, like it's all like your own responsibility to look at the options you have out there to see which of them you could potentially find yourself eligible to. So it's all, I
Right.
think, at the end of the day, like it's your responsibility. Like the government doesn't necessarily owe you anything. There is a framework that will support that goal. However, you have to drive that, right? Whether
Yeah.
it be the based on the province that you live in, but you just need to have that information to make that decision as to sort of, write your own story, right?
Right.
And I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of folks don't have that information. And so they just go off, oh, if this what John did, maybe Mary can do exact same thing and have the same outcome. No, Mary has a completely different background. She has completely different, combination of experience and work experience, education, all of that stuff. So I think a lot of people get lost in that. They go, if it worked for A and B, that same formula will work for me, but no, it would not.
Mhm.
It's a very
Yeah.
individual and personal journey. And so it's really important that, folks, take that cat and really just figure it out themselves, or again, with a professional if they are not feeling confident to do
Or work with the right people. Yeah, I mean, I
it.
think
Yeah.
one of the biggest probably, mistakes or at least misconceptions for a lot of international students is if I go study in Canada, I will get PR, right?
Mm-mm.
And that's not the case whatsoever. I think the problem is they're not going and having a consultation call with someone like you who will explain it as you've been doing it on this show, right? They're
Right.
going to talk to people or agents. I'm not saying all study abroad agents are bad, but there's a lot of shady study abroad agents
You know
who
what
are
though?
strictly working for commission.
Right. And I can see why those folks will have absolutely no idea whatsoever. They have not lived in Canada. They don't know what it means to go through that process. So in their mind, all they think about is their commissions. And so they go, oh yeah. I remember talking to a friend of mine who they had a bachelor's degree in computer science, right? And while they were thinking to come to Canada, they had fantastic grades. They were thinking to come to Canada. And at the time, they just didn't do any research themselves. And they met this agent. And the agent automatically pushed them to go do a diploma program. And then she goes, why are you recommending a diploma program for me? And the guy was like, oh, well, that's what, you can never get into a master's degree program because, I forget the exact, excuse that he gave the person. And then, of course, I didn't know her then until very recently. And she shared that experience with me. But my point being that there are lots of agents that they don't even know what it means to even live in Canada. They don't even know the difference between a diploma or a postgraduate certificate or a master's degree. They just do not know. All they think about is their commissions, and that's it. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen folks settle for programs that are like $65,000, $80,000. Like, why would you
Yeah.
go for a program, for a master's degree program in business analysis for $80,000? Why?
Right. And that's part of the inspiration behind this show is that hopefully aspiring international students can listen to this conversation and be like, wow, okay, I should probably talk to a reputable, regulated professional who's in Canada and knows all this stuff, right? Because now
Right.
it's more than ever, it's more than just getting your study permit approved, right? I think that's the problem, right? People are sitting overseas and they just want to get into Canada, which is fine. I understand it. They just want to get into Canada and they'll listen to the first agent that gets their first LOA that'll get them their first study permit
Yeah.
approved, right?
Or even Vista Visa. They go, oh yeah, I just did a Vista Visa. I remember working with a client and we had gone like really, further into the process. And then they go, oh, by the way, someone told me I can apply for a Vista Visa and I can apply for work permit when I get there. I'm like, where's this coming from? Who are you speaking to?
Mhm. Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
just a lot of, like I said earlier, there's just a lot of noise and just filtering through those noise. And I feel sorry for folks because some of them don't know. I remember
Mhm.
spoken to a few clients and they go, I never knew there was such thing as a regulated, Canadian immigration consultant. I
Right.
mean, they're more familiar with lawyers, but in their mind, I can't afford lawyer fees, right? That's always like okay, I can do this. But just people just don't know the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we can put a pin in that topic, it's please do your research, right? We're not
Right.
saying you have to talk to either of us, but
Now,
please, at the very least, do your research. And even spending 50, 100, 200 bucks for an intro consultation with someone good, you'll probably learn more in that time than endless free consultations with people who just want the commission that you represent, right?
right,
So,
right, right.
anyways. So, how do you think the next few years play out, Asaro? Because, like we kind of talked about, there's all these
Hmm.
students that have graduated that are continuing to graduate. Express entry score requirements are higher than ever. Government's hinting at like freezing the PR numbers, meaning like they're not going to increase them. They're going to keep them level, right? I think around like 500,000, which is a big amount. But as we're seeing with express entry, the score requirements are tough.
Hmm.
What do you think? It could be at the TR to PR type stuff, or it could be just the, Canadian immigration in general. Do you have any thoughts on how the next few years might go?
I worry. I worry for those that are here that may find that they're stuck and there's no really pathway to permanent residency. I worry because a lot of folks may be disappointed years down the line, and I worry that may not be the priority for the government at that point in time. However, not seeing how immigration goes, there seem to be swift changes here and there, but I don't know that we will ever be back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago, where it was hoorah, let's go immigration, right? I don't know that
Right.
we'll really get back there, but I really worry for the pathways that folks could potentially explore. I'm more worried for those that are already here because I know what it feels to leave your home and leave everything behind and start afresh. I'm not worried for those that haven't come in yet because I feel like, you can still get with your life. But if you moved here with your children, you're coming here as a student or as a worker, and you're not able to transition over to permanent residency, having to uproot your entire livelihood again and your children and your family back to your home country, those are the folks I feel more worried for, right?
Yeah.
And I really
Yeah.
feel that the earlier folks that exploring options, the better. Like, don't wait till last minute. I remember having a conversation with a client and she had like 6 months back. So in the whole 3 years, like 2.5 years prior to now, that your PGWP is getting expired, like it would have been better if we had this conversation like 2 years ago, right?
Right.
But I think
Yeah.
a lot of folks just leave things to last minute going, oh, the stars will align, some of us are very
Mhm.
religious and we go, oh, yeah, God is going to make everything happen. Okay, yeah, but you really have to put in the work, right? And not like they say is power, but if you don't have that knowledge, you're just going to be there. And then last minute, you're going to go, oops, had I know, then it's almost like too late at that point. But
Yeah.
yeah, overall, I'm really,
So let me ask you this then. I mean, I love living in Canada, but what would you recommend if you got on a call with someone who's in wherever? They're outside Canada, they're
hmm
22, they just finished their undergrad, they're thinking about coming to do a master's or whatever as an
yeah,
international student right now. What would you tell them or what would you suggest?
yeah,
Do you think it's
I,
worth it for them to apply even right now? I mean, I still think so, right? For the right people and the
yeah,
right fit, it does make
I,
sense, but
that I would look at their field, like what's the field you're in, right? I would look
mhm.
at what their grades are. I would look at the potential programs that they could get into. I would explore provincial nomination pathways with those students first. Maybe not at the federal level, but again, depends on their field, right? If they're in that field where, prioritize occupation, then absolutely, right? If not, I would obviously go here is, what the trend has been over the past few years. Where the trends are going to go right now, we can't say for sure. We can only forecast based on what we've seen. But ultimately, here is all the information you need to make that decision. I really stay away from helping folks make decisions because it's not in my place to do that. And also
Mhm.
from a liability perspective. But really, I just go, here's the information you need to make that decision, right? And in most cases,
Mhm.
people feel more confident with decisions that they make by themselves with the information that, they've either researched or they've been provided with. And they're really smart when making that decision, knowing that, by the ways, this is what's going to happen in the future based on the information that we have today. Because quite frankly, we really can't predict that much, right? We can only say
Mhm.
this has been the pattern and this is what we suspect will happen, but we don't know for sure, right?
Absolutely. No, I think you explained it perfect, and I hope you and I haven't scared too many people from,
I hope
considering
not.
Canada, because it is a great place, right, to study and live and all that good stuff. But I like the way you put it, which, if I can summarize, is people shouldn't evaluate coming to study in Canada as just a study permit application. They should look at it as a multi-step process of, okay, what program do you want to study? And what does that lead to in terms of a career? And what PNP or express entry options can it lead to upon graduation? So I really like how you explain that. It's a full approach, right? Evaluating the process, not
Mm-hmm.
just to get the study permit approved, but kind of building a few years down the road, right? So that
Yeah.
there's a PR pathway. So I think that's
Yeah.
great advice. Maybe what we'll do is we'll end on that more positive note. Any last words, Osaro, in terms of thoughts or ideas or recommendations for the listeners?
I would really say that if you're thinking about your Canadian immigration journey, I would say you really need to spend so much time researching. I feel like you just need to research. And if you do not have that time to really go super deep into the weeds, get a consultant, get a lawyer that's licensed and authorized to practice in Canada. Have that, if it's that 1 hour consultation. When I work with clients that are just ideating immigrating to Canada, I just go book a consultation session because really then we can really go into all the different options that could be available to you, and then you can go away feeling that you have the information you need to make that decision, right? It's really important that you tie your short-term goal to your long-term goal and ensuring that they align, and ask yourself, what steps are you taking today to meet your goal for tomorrow? If they are not aligned, maybe that's not a decision you should be taking, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's great advice. It surprises me, I think like you, that so many aspiring students put so much blind faith in unregulated professionals abroad. They should think about this as, you might be spending 30, 40, 50 plus thousand on tuition plus more. Think about it as like walking into a car dealer. If you were going to buy a car for $50,000,
Yeah.
would you just walk in, listen to someone blabble in your ear for 10 minutes and then, sign me up, right?
Yeah.
Probably
No.
not, right? You'd do your digging, you'd evaluate the different options, you'd test drive it a
Right.
couple times, right? So I
Yeah.
totally agree. This has been a great conversation, Asaro. I hope it opens some minds to especially aspiring, international students and helps them make the right decisions. If anybody does want to get in touch with you or learn more about your company, where do you recommend that they go to learn more?
Well, yeah, sure. Just you can find us on Instagram, Grad Life Canada Immigration. I think we are also on TikTok, but we're just there, and on LinkedIn as well. And you can also visit our website, gradlifeimmigration.ca. And yeah, I would love to meet with you and help you navigate your journey. I feel very personal about this because I feel like I'm reliving my experience again. And so I find my job very rewarding, and I really cannot wait to help you navigate that path as well.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Doug. This was great.